Me too.
Okay. All right. I'm all recording and set up, so yes, we can get going. Cool.
Same here.
Me too.
You're listening to the Station 71 podcast with your hosts, Mario.
Beth?
And Brian.
Intro music. So this week we are going to be talking about some of Disney's sponsorships, be it past, present, attractions, anything that's been kind of a sponsorship for Disney World in the past. We're going to talk about that this week. First up, as always, let's talk about the news. So, first up on our list of topics, we're going to give some more love to Hollywood Studios. The forest at Star Wars Galaxy Edge is now being planted. Never thought I'd be reading a news story about trees. But we're starting to see some stuff pop up on the walls behind where Galaxy's Edge is going to be built. Lots of trees and stuff like that are coming out, which means that we're moving right along with Galaxy's Edge. Super exciting. I know we're all really excited about that here.
Definitely.
Yeah. I'm glad that they're adding all these like fully matured trees to kind of obscure it from view.
It's going to be interesting how the sightlines work on this, because the trees like definitely are, like you said, kind of obscuring it right now. And I'm hoping that that's the case for everything that's going on inside of it. So I'm really excited about that. I really like that they're still kind of paying attention to that whole sightline feeling in Hollywood Studios.
All right. I know we talked about that a little bit either last week or the week before about being worried about being able to see the different lands within Hollywood Studios, but this is definitely a good step towards having the theming kind of separated.
Have they talked about the entrance yet? Like how you're going to enter Galaxy's Edge?
Not that I know of.
Because I mean, like, there's a picture in this set. I'm going to link all of this in the show notes. But there's a picture in this set that kind of looks like there's like an archway to enter into it. I really want to know if they're going to take like some kind of cue like Harry Potter did, where they made it like there's a transition to go into the land, or that's what I'm really excited to find out about.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that would be a good way to do it, just because it is going to be very hard and kind of jarring going from one area to the other. So if you have to do something kind of jarring in itself to get you from one land to the other, I'm all for that.
Yeah. So staying in Hollywood Studios, and speaking of jarring, let's talk about the Toy Story entrance marquee that's popped up. So also another thing I'm going to link in the show notes, but a giant Woody statue with a bunch of blocks that spell out Toy Story Land has popped up at the entrance of Toy Story Land. I know we're super close to the arrival of Toy Story Land, so I guess we all kind of saw this coming, but man, I don't know how I feel about this.
Yeah, I'm not really a fan as of right now. I don't hate it by any means, but I just feel like it's too in your face.
This is one I'm definitely going to have to see in person just to see how much this scale impacts this.
Yeah. Well, here's my other thing. Where else in the parks are there? I mean, I guess life size would be the best word for it, even though it's probably larger than life. But where else are there statues of characters like this? Like, that's what's kind of a little bit jarring to me, is that this feels like, one, it's not something that Disney's done before, which, that's usually a good thing. But something like this, I feel like they usually reserve their characters for the interactions and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. To me, it just feels weird that they're putting like a statue, a non-moving piece of something here. I don't know.
Yeah, it is a bit strange.
But I don't know. I guess we'll see how that pans out and what it actually looks like in person in relation to the land. I think that'll be my deciding feature, is when I see what it looks like in relation to everything else.
Yeah, me too. I don't know. It just doesn't feel like a Disney level of creativity.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
But we'll see.
Although if you do, okay, so if you look at the fourth picture in that set and the one that I linked in the show notes, it doesn't look as big as the other ones do. I will say that because there is a person that's kind of to scale, so it looks like maybe it's smaller and it's just kind of like a short sign to let you know that you're getting into Toy Story Land. But I'll reserve my judgment until we see some other things come out about it.
Yeah.
But after that, we have something we kind of missed pretty recently. But they're adding some live entertainment to Pandora. We're seeing utility suits pop up. They're kind of like mech suits, I guess is the best way to explain them. But any addition to Pandora, any live love is a good thing. So I'm super excited that they're putting walk around characters that are unique to this land in this area.
Definitely. And I wouldn't have thought that Pandora would be where they would want to put more Streetmosphere, but if it works, I'm all for it. Definitely helps tie in the theming.
Yeah, I think this is really cool.
They look awesome too. Like I'm a fan. This is something.
I don't get how they work.
So I'm looking at this. I'm assuming that the legs coming out like in the seated position are fake. The operator's actual legs are going down to the legs, and they're basically like stilts. That's what I'm imagining with this.
That's what I was thinking too, but I'm just like, what is this made out of that they're able to walk successfully in it?
It must be extremely lightweight, at least a lot more than it looks like.
Yeah. It's really cool though. I'm glad that they've added this.
Yeah. I'm really happy that they're not taking Streetmosphere away from everything.
Yeah, for sure.
And last up in our news topics, we have, apparently this didn't load right for me. Guardians of the Galaxy Awesome Mix Live begins June 9th at Epcot. So we all knew that Guardians of the Galaxy was coming to Epcot in the form of the new roller coaster that's going where Ellen's Energy Adventure was, but we're getting a new, I guess, performance stage show type thing. This read kind of similar to the Incredibles dance party to me, but it's going to be showing up at the American Gardens Theater near Epcot. Super exciting. It's really cool to see some love come to Guardians of the Galaxy because that's one of the few Marvel things that we'll ever see on this side of the coast.
Yeah, at least unless they work some deal out.
I'm calling it. I'm going to call it. Disney's going to buy that contract out or something.
I feel like they're just waiting for the time to like come about for them to have that opportunity.
I mean, Universal's not going to let it up. There's no way that they're going to let it up like super easily, but I feel like Disney's got to at this point. Like Marvel's making them so much money. There's no reason that they shouldn't be looking to buy it.
Yeah, and like don't get me wrong, I think that Marvel Superhero Island is like the rides in there are really awesome, like particularly the Hulk coaster and the Spider-Man 3D ride, but I feel like the Hulk coaster just got like a big refurbishment last year, the year before, if I'm not mistaken. But the Spider-Man one, I think, could use a little love, but I don't think that they're going to do that if they think that there's, I guess, any possibility that they're going to have to completely redo it in the future if Disney buys them out. So I think it could be beneficial for both sides, not to mention the fact that Universal is planning on opening like the Nintendo Land. So like, where's that going to go?
Yeah, I was thinking that they were going to put Nintendo where Marvel was, or Marvel is, but that's, I don't know. It just seems really weird.
Yeah.
I feel like Universal's waiting for them to buy it out and Disney's waiting to buy it out for the right price. So,
well, with all that money that they just made on Black Panther and all the money they're about to make this weekend on Infinity War, I think they can afford it.
Oh yeah, they definitely can afford to do it. Come on, Disney, do it. Peer pressure. So are you guys ready to dive into the topic this week?
Let's
Yep.
do it.
Okay. So sorry, I heard whatever that was, and I thought that was like a train whistle, and I was like, I guess we're going.
Am I cooking dinner?
Uh, okay, so this week we're going to be talking sponsorships. Sponsorships are a big thing for a lot of attractions in Disney. They've kind of always been around in some way or another, and we're going to talk about some past, present, and interesting sponsorships with some of the attractions. So where do we want to start with this?
Maybe we should just give like a kind of overview.
Okay, who added the stuff in the general section? I'll let you read that because that looks like some good information.
That was me.
Okay.
So just as like a little bit of general history, specifically for Disneyland's opening, Walt relied a lot on sponsorships to get a lot of those attractions up and running on opening day. And according to history, that several of them wouldn't have been completed on time without sponsorships. I think back then, it was more of a necessity thing than it is now for Disney. Whereas I feel like now it's more beneficial to the sponsor for, I guess, word of mouth. It's nice for Disney, I guess, to have the offset of the cost of, upkeep and whatever of the attraction. But, there is a little bit of a trade-off since the sponsor gets to kind of determine different factors about the attraction, which we'll kind of go into a little bit later. But generally, Disney would approach a certain company, say, hey, we have this ride that we're either building or we're changing like sponsorships. Are you interested? And then the corporation would sign a 5 to 10 year contract to have their name associated with that attraction.
Nice. So as you can kind of tell, sponsorships have been around for like forever. And it is really important to know that a lot of these attractions really wouldn't be built if it weren't for the sponsorship. But let's dive into Epcot since that's first on our list of places and probably the most heavily sponsored, I would think.
Yeah, for sure.
Actually, that's the first point on our list is that sponsorship paid for the majority of Epcot.
Yeah,
also,
it's speculated that the park may not have even gotten built if not for sponsorship. So
I would believe that with how many of the pavilions had sponsors or have sponsors. But first, let's dive into them in the order that we've got them. We'll talk about Journey into Imagination,
which we totally ragged on last week.
Yeah, good time to talk about that. But Kodak is the sponsor for Journey into Imagination. That one's pretty obvious, I would say, right? Or at least it used to be.
Yeah, they're no longer.
Oh, yeah, that's right. But they definitely put that in a lot of places, even in the ImageWorks with like the kiosks and stuff like that. I think that's probably like the only remaining thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just gonna let you guys read your stuff that you have because I didn't write anything for Journey into Imagination.
Well, so one of the biggest things with their sponsorship was that, like we said before, they get their say in changes to the ride and just, the overall operation of it. And last week we talked about when the changes came to it, they were pretty negatively received. And a lot of this actually came from Kodak. And I didn't realize this until doing some research this week about it. But one of the reasons that the ride kind of turned out the way it was because Kodak wanted to shorten it and add the thing at the end as kind of a way to advertise for some new digital cameras that were coming out at the time. Yeah, and that's basically the main reason why ImageWorks is no longer open, was that Kodak wanted the guests getting off the ride to go to this new, post-ride area that they had set up for advertisements instead of going to ImageWorks and doing the other stuff. So,
That's interesting. I didn't know any of that.
And I'm sure we'll get into kind of, some of these sponsorships have very positive aspects to them. Some of them have very negative ones. And I think this is definitely one you can look at and say that the corporate sponsor kind of messed up the attraction.
Yeah. And I mean, there's definitely a few that you can look at it and go, oh, okay. Yeah, I see why that got worse or, closed down in some instances. But I definitely did not know that they were the reason that it changed.
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting. And my little small note that I added, I always wondered, I'm like, why do I see this merchandise where Figment is wearing this hideous red and yellow sweater? Like, it just, I'm not a fan of it. I think it looks awful and is really like badly contrasting to like the purple that Figment is. And I found out that it's actually because that was Kodak's colors. So they determined he's going to wear a red and yellow sweater. So another way they kind of jacked that up a little bit.
I saw that the main reason Kodak did that, though, was when Disney was originally pitching it to them. Figment was wearing a green sweater, which was their, at the time, direct competitor Fujifilm's main color in their logo and everything. So they definitely didn't want it to be green. So they completely flipped the other way and put their colors in it.
Mm.
That's funny. I did not know that at all. But some of the next stuff that we have on here are current sponsors, which I don't think any of these really had any issues, at least that I've noticed. But we can go through the list of them. Test Track's currently sponsored by Chevy, which I would, I would assume that that's why it gets the updates it does. I'm okay with them sponsoring it. Anything about Test Track from you guys?
No. I mean, I think they do a good job with it. The only thing really is in the queue, they show some of their concept cars, which I think is actually kind of cool because, you're still keeping with looking to the future, which fits in perfectly with Epcot. And at the end, they usually have their models of, like their current models of cars, which, isn't that big a deal in my opinion because there's still other cool interactive stuff to do. They could definitely do way worse. When you're designing your car to actually go on the ride, how easy it'd be for them to be like, oh, design your own Corvette, or they could make it where you're having to design one of their cars. But the fact that they leave it open and not as a branded vehicle, I think is pretty cool.
I do like that. I think that that's where you do sponsorship right, where it's, they're paying for the attraction. They are putting some advertising in it. It's there. It's just not in your face.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder, like, how effective it is. Like, who goes and rides that ride, and then at the post-show area, they're like, "Yeah, I'm definitely buying this car in the showroom." I mean, I'm sure it's happened, but I wonder how often.
To me, the way that I look at that, it's almost the same as like going to a car show. You walk into that showroom, you look at the stuff that's there, and you're like, "Oh wow, this is awesome." And then, maybe you go home and that stuck with you, or you have some pictures in it. And you're like, maybe I really want this car. I mean, obviously I don't have the money to do that, but there's got to be someone out there that does.
Yeah. I always think it's interesting how many people I see taking pictures of and with the cars.
Right. And I would assume that that's probably a, reason why they're still there.
Yeah, for sure.
But after that, Living with the Land is sponsored by Chiquita. I don't think that there's really much of a mention of that with Living with the Land, is there?
So subtle. When you when you float by the bananas, there's like a little sign that says sponsored by Chiquita. And that's, as far as I know, the only mention of it.
I think on somewhere near the entrance to the actual attraction, I believe there's another Chiquita sign, but very, very subtle.
Right. And that's like, again, a lot of these ones that do it right are either subtle or it makes sense with the attraction. For example, the next one being Club Cool, makes sense that that's sponsored by Coke. I mean,
Well, see, here's the thing for me is Club Cool, I think, is a great example because when people go there, they taste all the different Coke products from around the world. And, I'm sure all of us have our favorites of like which one we wish that we could actually buy. Like you know, I wish that they had like the Melon Frosty soda here in the United States that you could get somewhere other than Club Cool and like World of Coke in Atlanta. But so it's like that, I think, is good advertising because it gets people talking. But I don't see how that the Chiquita example works, because I don't feel like people go to a grocery store and they see Chiquita bananas and they're like, oh yeah, they sponsored Living with the Land. I'm going to buy these instead of that generic brand. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But anyway.
That is a good question, though. Like, some of these, where do they really draw the need to sponsor? But I don't think I'm complaining about Chiquita sponsoring Living with the Land.
Yeah, no, definitely not. But
I mean, you see what happens when people pull their sponsorships, and I would hate for that to happen with Living with the Land.
Yeah, for sure.
Which we'll get to that too, I'm sure. But after that, Colortopia, sponsored by, I can never pronounce this company's name right, Glidden, okay.
Which is a paint company, so that makes sense.
Yeah, that also makes sense. And the Spectra Lab is sponsored by, what is that? I have never heard of them.
Murata, I just looked it up. Apparently it's a smartphone company.
Huh.
Or
I mean,
electronic components in smartphones.
I've never heard of them.
Me either.
I guess that, I mean, to be fair, I can't say that I've been to Spectra Lab.
Yeah, I haven't been there since this opened, but it's interesting. I mean, maybe this is a good opportunity for them to get their name out.
Right. After that, we have some other stuff on here. I see Spaceship Earth. Do we want to talk about Spaceship Earth?
Yeah. So Siemens, it's a company, for people who don't know. They supply power generation and medical diagnostic systems. They do a bunch of stuff, but that's like their big thing. And they've been a sponsor of Spaceship Earth and Illuminations for a really, really long time. I should have looked up the exact date, but last September they officially decided, we're cutting ties. And I don't know if it was the original cutoff was kind of brought on by anything in particular, but I was doing a little bit of research and found out that Disney was unwilling to extend the sponsorship once it ended. So I don't know if something happened between the companies or what, but apparently Siemens had offered to pay for a whole new fleet of monorails, but the stipulation was that the new monorails had to be branded with Siemens logo, and that they would be paying less for the sponsorships of Spaceship Earth and Illuminations because of the fleet. That would be kind of subsidizing that extra cost. So Disney, I guess, instead of doing any kind of negotiations, was just like, all right, well, bye.
Huh. That's interesting.
But I'm glad that they didn't go for the branded monorails, though, because I would have hated that.
Yeah. I think the monorails are a thing that don't need to have that sponsorship. Obviously we've talked in the past about how we want them to do better upkeep with the monorails, or maybe send some new ones our way. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that them having a sponsor would really benefit. At least with the attractions, they're paying for the upkeep. They have to refurbish them. They have to do stuff to them. That makes sense because there's so much wear and tear. But other than buying new monorails every couple of years, what would that really do for them?
Yeah. And if Disney's not willing to brand it, then there's not a whole lot of benefit for the corporation either.
Exactly.
Though, I will say, if some corporation was able to step in there, provide funding, which now extended the monorail lines to the other parks, I think I could deal with there being sponsorship on the monorail.
Yeah, I think I could deal with that too.
But that's probably, not going to happen.
Right.
Never know. But yeah, so after that, we've got That looks like. Do you want to give that fun fact that you have in there?
Sure. So kind of moving from Future World into World Showcase. I think a lot of people believe that the reason that whatever particular countries are in World Showcase is because those governments sponsored the pavilions. But I actually found out that only 2 countries contributed any kind of money towards the construction of their pavilions, and it's Morocco and Norway, which are the 2 that did not open with the park. So Morocco Pavilion opened in 1984 and Norway in 1988. The thing that I thought was really interesting was that the king of Morocco, King Hassan II at the time, was really interested in showcasing Morocco to American tourists and letting Disney World guests kind of get the Moroccan experience. So he dedicated a lot of the government money and sent over like architects and all kinds of craftsmen to construct the pavilion and work with Disney for it, because he was so adamant about the authenticity of Morocco being represented. And once the design was complete, they sent him a model of the pavilion for the architects to review, and they had to approve it before they could actually go forward with anything. So if you think about it, it makes sense, because I do feel like Morocco is, in my opinion, one of, if not the most kind of detailed and authentic seeming of the countries represented. So I thought that was really interesting.
That is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then for Norway, there wasn't a big, huge story about it, but the funding for the Norway Pavilion was by several different Norwegian companies and then partially funded by the government. So not a big, I guess, push from the government to show it like they wanted to with Morocco.
I remember seeing a thing too that's the reason that the end of Maelstrom featured the big oil rig. I forget what Disney had originally planned to put there, but I remember seeing that the companies that were working to build or help design the Norway Pavilion really wanted to showcase Norway's big push into oil drilling, so that's why they ended up putting that in there.
That would also make a lot of sense.
Because it does seem a bit out of place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also thought that it was interesting that the department store in Japan, the Mitsukoshi, I don't know how to pronounce it. So that's like a real department store chain in Japan. And they were actually, and so they actually sponsored the Japan Pavilion. So that's why their store is there.
Very cool.
That's, I didn't know that. But I want to talk about, before we leave Epcot, we kind of briefly mentioned how sometimes a sponsorship can ultimately be the end of the attraction. In a lot of cases, that's brought up in Epcot specifically because of the Wonders of Life Pavilion. So I do want to talk about that for a little bit. I know we didn't put anything about that on the show notes, but this is definitely one of those things where, like, a sponsor leaving a pavilion or leaving an attraction can ultimately hurt that attraction. For those that don't know, Wonders of Life was sponsored by MetLife, and when they pulled their sponsorship, there was some issues with them and Disney. When they pulled their sponsorship, ultimately that was the end of that. So typically things like that, where the sponsors will pay for the upkeep of the attraction and take care of everything. If they don't, then that's sometimes what happens.
Mm-hmm.
So
speaking of the Wonders of Life Pavilion, I don't know if you guys regularly listen to the Disney Dish podcast with Jim Hill, but I was listening to an episode that I think came out a couple of weeks ago, and Jim Hill, you gotta love him, but you gotta kind of take everything he says with a grain of salt. But I did think that he brought up an interesting rumor that the Wonders of Life Pavilion could potentially get rethemed into Black Panther, because of the idea that, I don't know if you guys have seen Black Panther, but Wakanda, the country, is hidden under a dome-like shape to the rest of the world. And Wonders of Life Pavilion is a dome-like shape, and the fact that there's room in there for several different attractions, and the building itself is pretty huge, so they could kind of do whatever they want with it. And so, like I said, take it with a grain of salt, but I thought that was an interesting rumor to at least speculate on.
That's an interesting idea, but that also seems really far-fetched.
Yeah, and but the thing is, it's now that the Guardians are coming, it's not that far-fetched as I think it would have been a couple of years ago.
That's also very fair. So, do we want to move on to Hollywood Studios?
Well, one more thing. I would feel remiss if we did not mention Horizons. I know we talked at length about this on the Extinct Disney Attraction podcast, but this was another one that when corporate sponsorship got dropped from GE this time, the attraction, basically started its countdown to just being forgotten. So if you want a little bit more in-depth talk about that, you can go back and listen to one of our old episodes. But this is kind of almost on the same lines as Kodak's sponsorship of Journey to Imagination. Just like when things started going wrong, it went really wrong for a very good attraction.
Wasn't that, now I may be thinking about a completely different attraction, but isn't that the one that got like handed from sponsor to sponsor, and like that's just what ruined it?
The one that I think about mostly that gets handed from sponsor to sponsor was If You Could Fly, and
that was it.
We'll talk about coming up, but as far as I know, General Electric was the sponsor from the opening with Horizons, and then basically almost up until its final closing. It very quickly deteriorated once General Electric dropped their sponsorship. And I don't think anyone else picked it up.
Yeah, I don't think they did either. But with that, we can move on to studios then, I guess. So first up on that list would be Rock and Roller Coaster, which was recently sponsored by Haynes, or recently ended their deal with Haynes. That was always a weird one to me. Like,
I always think about underwear.
Yeah,
or like a plain white T-shirt. It's like,
exactly what I was going to say.
A plain white T-shirt.
Well, and it's one of those things that, like, I remember seeing the sponsored by Haynes sign on the attraction sign, but like, where else did they mention it? Like, what else did that really do for advertising for Haynes?
Right.
Wasn't it like shaped like a guitar pick?
Yeah. It was on the guitar pick, I think.
Trying real hard to fit in there.
And I don't understand. I mean, I'm sure it would have been expensive, but I don't understand why a company like Gibson or Fender didn't step in and sponsor this. I mean, obviously we see now like Gibson, they're in pretty rough shape right now. I don't know if y'all have heard about that, but like it's like, man, that's one that would fit in. I don't understand why sponsors don't try to get their foot in the door with something that's kind of connected to their brand.
Right. Or even something like Bose, like just something speaker related, but Haynes. And honestly, I want to know how that conversation went.
And honestly, you could probably even extend it as far as like even Samsung or someone that does like anything entertainment. It would make more sense than Haynes. But you know what? I'm not going to complain, because if they paid for anything on the attraction, I'm sure it helped at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with the fact that Haynes ended their sponsorship, I wonder if it'll be any impetus to change the theming now that they possibly could.
Well, we've kind of talked about that a little bit. Like, it feels like now would be an appropriate time to change Rock and Roller Coaster.
Mm-hmm.
Like, with how everything in Hollywood Studios is getting changed, and honestly, Kirsten, cover your ears, but how relevant is Aerosmith right now?
Oops.
Well, and just even changing to a different band would be so simple. I mean, you need to redo the pre-show, and you need to change the music that's played during the ride. That's it. Nothing,
Right.
nothing physical about the ride needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I see something coming for this fairly soon.
Yeah.
But speaking of sponsorships that don't make any sense to me, the next one on this list has me a little confused too. Baby Bell Cheese is sponsoring Toy Story Land. Is that...
They just wanted to get their name out there more, I guess. They saw the opportunity and they went for it.
Yeah.
What? Like,
maybe it's like you put it in your lunchbox, your Woody's lunchbox.
I'm really interested to see where this pops up. Like, is it going to be in the marquee sign that we're seeing? Like, is it going to have a little Baby Bell Cheese logo at the bottom?
Oh, God, I hope not.
That would actually be disgusting.
Yeah, these ones that don't make any sense, you have to imagine like either they were already kind of in cahoots with someone that worked at the company, or they were like at the bottom of the barrel, like, we really need a sponsor. I don't care if it's relevant.
Well, the other thing I'm thinking of is maybe it's going to be like, there's like, you know how sometimes when you get a kid's meal at Disney, they give you like the little side cups of things. Maybe they'll give you like a little Baby Bell cheese or something. Like,
I'm sure they will.
That's what I'm thinking. Maybe it is like, maybe it's some kind of correlation like that.
Yeah, because they did something similar to that at Epcot. I remember for, I believe it was maybe Flower and Garden last year, but they had a little like butterfly booth set up. And I know that one of the things they were like the little, I forget the company, but they do the little squeeze applesauce packets.
Yeah. I was thinking about that.
Yeah, they were.
I think it's called Go-Go Squeeze.
Yeah,
Go-Go Squeeze.
So, that's something that they've obviously done before. So I wouldn't put it past them to do that here.
And it might even just be like a minor sponsorship where it's like, that's what it is.
Though, I really appreciated after walking around a very hot Epcot getting like a nice cold applesauce. I don't think I want like a cheese wheel after walking around in the sun. So I don't think this will be as appreciated as Go-Go Squeeze's sponsorship.
Yeah, that's very true. I also think that like Hollywood Studios is weird because I can't really think of anything now that's sponsored there, which I guess to a fair point on that is that there's not really a lot in studios. But when I think of studios in sponsorships, I think about like Turner Classic Movies and Great Movie Ride and stuff like that, which that was a sponsorship that, that made sense for as well.
Until it kind of became irrelevant.
Yeah.
And I think, Beth, you made the point last time that we talked about this, but how much did Turner Classic Movies sponsoring it like hold back the progression of it,
Yeah, that's very fair.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I also feel like that's one attraction that like I don't think there was any way that they could have really saved in the end, I guess.
Yeah. And I think this kind of, I guess, backs up the idea of Rock and Roller Coaster possibly being rethemed, is because shortly after it was announced that Disney wasn't renewing its sponsorship with Turner Classic Movies is when they announced that they were redoing it to Minnie and Mickey's Runaway Railway or whatever.
Apparently, I did not know this, and I probably feel like I should have, but Coca-Cola sponsored Great Movie Ride from 1989 to 1998. That's a very weird sponsor as well.
Yeah.
But do we want to move on to Magic Kingdom?
Sure.
Okay, so first up is Brian's If You Had Wings Dream Flight fiasco that you love to talk about.
Yeah, this is again another one that we touched on, the extinct attraction, so I'll kind of move through it quickly. But basically, this was an attraction that opened up in '72, not long after the opening of Disney World. Eastern Airlines at the time was the official airline of Disney. So this was basically an attraction to kind of showcase some of the more popular places that Eastern flew to as vacation destinations. So it basically was a ride that kind of like took you through the different ones and showed you kind of the highlights of the different areas. But they opened, like I said, in 72 after Eastern Airlines sponsorship dropped, which I believe was at the time that Eastern Airlines was actually closed down. I'm not completely sure about that, but it was closed down and then reopened in 1987 as If You Could Fly. And notice that this happens twice where the ride loses its sponsorship and Disney has to like very subtly change it a little bit just to remove all of the sponsorship mentions, knowing that it's going to be a very temporary thing. So we had If You Had Wings, sponsored by Eastern Airlines, shuts down, becomes the non-sponsored If You Could Fly, which they basically just went in and removed mentions of Eastern Airlines. It was then picked up in 89 by Delta, and the ride became Delta Dream Flight, with a very similar idea behind If You Had Wings, but now with just a Delta sponsorship. In 96, Delta dropped their sponsorship, and now it becomes Disney's Take Flight, which is, again, essentially the exact same ride. Disney just went through and took out all the mentioning of Delta Airlines, and then it was finally closed down and opened as Buzz Lightyear's Space Ranger Spin, which had nothing to do with the previous attractions.
Yikes.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mess. And, you know, this is one where looking back at some of the ride-through videos and, you know, concept art of the original ride, it's very apparent that Eastern Airlines had a pretty huge, you know, amount of decision making that went into this, but it wasn't necessarily bad or, you know, it wasn't so much of a push for advertising. Like, I think it, from what I've seen, it still worked pretty well as a standalone attraction and not just basically a giant advertisement. But, you know, even with that, you can see how weird and, you know, disheveled things get once the sponsorships start dropping in and out. And, you know, this ride is the prime example of that.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know. That's one of those things that it feels like the right intentions were there to sponsor that attraction and have someone pay for it. But seeing that that's what happens, it makes you a little weary when, you know, Disney talks about having anyone sponsor anything.
Right, which, because at some point in time, the sponsorship is going to come to an end, and then it becomes the big question: is Disney going to pick it up themselves and, you know, take care of the refurbishment costs and everything now and keep the ride up? Are they going to do something completely different with it, or are they just going to kind of let it sit? You know, which is a lot of what we saw at Epcot until things eventually got worse and worse, and kind of is why I think is a huge reason that Future World's in the state that it's in right now.
Yeah, and I think we'll see how that pans out over the next couple of years with, you know, either someone picking it up or Disney themselves picking it up.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, we've got Happily Ever After is sponsored by Pandora. This is one that's like totally, it has no effect on the show, I think.
Yeah, I would agree, except, I mean, I've only seen Happily Ever After once, but I feel like there is, you know, how wishes would start and you would get this like warm and fuzzy feeling as Jiminy Cricket was talking to you. But Happily Ever After, it's like the announcer's like, now we present Happily Ever After, brought to you by Pandora. And I don't think that I'm making that up in my head, but I could be, but I'm pretty sure I'm not.
I'm pretty sure you're not, because I feel like I've heard that.
So, I mean, it's a very, very minor thing, but I kind of don't like being reminded of the real world when I'm at Disney, so I wasn't a fan.
And that's an interesting point about all of these, is like, you know, we've been talking here and there about what is too much sponsorship. Like, what breaks that immersion that you're not in just like some mythical place. And I think that's one of those things where like after the initial announcement, like there's no, like it would be one thing if it was the initial announcement and then like every Disney princess you saw was wearing a Pandora bracelet.
Oh my God,
like
that would be the worst.
that would be in your face, but like that's, that's fine. After that, we have Dole Whips on here, and someone, I'm gonna throw this to you, Beth, because I know this is your thing, but I do have a comment after you've said your thoughts.
Yeah, so I was just like, me and my boyfriend were talking about this topic before we started recording, and it was actually him that brought up the idea of Dole Whips. Is he's like, that's the best sponsorship Disney has, I think, or at least the most beneficial for the other company, because like I kind of put in our show notes is that Dole, you don't call it a pineapple whip or pineapple soft serve or pineapple swirl. It's a Dole Whip, and everyone knows what it is just by saying that. So I think this is a really good example of how like branding and sponsorship worked really well for the other company, because Dole Whips are a huge part of a lot of people's Disney trips, and the fact that they're saying Dole, 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 that's ingraining it in your head, and half of knowledge is just exposure. So I think that's a really, really smart thing that Dole did here.
So I've mentioned this before, and I can't remember if I've mentioned this on the show, but have I told you guys about the Aloha Isle that's around here?
Yeah.
So that's a thing that, like, I think it's a Dole thing to call it the Dole Whip, because the Aloha Isle around here that looks very rundown. I don't know if I've mentioned this on the show. I know I've mentioned it to them, but where I live on one of the boardwalks, there is a place called Aloha Isle, and they have a big sign out front that says serves Dole Whip. And like, obviously me being the opposite side of the coast from Disney, it's a little weird to me that that would be like a thing, I'm used to seeing in Disney and seeing it on the boardwalk. But I want to say that that's a Dole thing, and it's super smart. You're 100% right. But the weird thing about that is, for me, seeing that sign that says Aloha Isle now serving Dole Whip, that doesn't say Dole Company, that says Disney World. So I don't know if that has the opposite effect that they would want from it, but at the same time, you're 100% right. That's like the best way they could have put their name on something.
Yeah, I was thinking that same thing. Like when I hear Dole Whip, I don't think of the company. It's like it's become so popular and it's become its like own thing that you don't really, or at least I don't think of Dole. When I hear Dole Whip, I just think of, like you say, going to Disney and getting one.
Yeah, and I think that's very true. And again, kind of what I was saying is like just the exposure of the name, I think, helps them a lot. And I think that, like you were saying, Mario, you can get Dole Whips outside of Disney World. Like you can go to Menchie's pretty much anywhere in the country, and on the right day, they're gonna have Dole in their soft serve, like Dole pineapple soft serve. I don't think they call it a Dole Whip at Menchie's, but it's not the same as having it at Disney, in my opinion.
Next time that I go to the boardwalk, which it's starting to get nicer out, so hopefully that'll be soon, I'm gonna have to stop at this place and send you guys pictures, for one, but also see if it tastes the same and see how I feel about it.
It's like, don't get me wrong, it's delicious, and whenever I have like I'm missing Disney, I'm like, I'm gonna go to Menchie's. But it's just, there's something about having it like at the Polynesian or at Magic Kingdom that makes it taste better.
Totally agree.
Yep.
But after that, we have Sunshine Tree Terrace. Was originally sponsored by Florida Citrus Commission, who is what the Orangeburg was developed for. I don't know if we have anything else to say on that one, but that's a unique little thing.
Yeah, I think this was interesting. I'm a big fan of Orangebird for I don't know, undescribable reasons. He's just super cute, I guess. But I thought that's really interesting that they literally developed this character because of their sponsorship with the Florida Citrus Commission. And I can't really think of an example other than that where a character literally was the product of a sponsorship at Disney.
And that's really cool too, because even though the sponsorship's probably not around anymore, the character's definitely still a thing.
Yeah, and actually it took a while to get him back though. I won't go too deep into it, but maybe, we can in the future if we do a show on like lost Disney stories or whatever. But there was a big chunk of time where after their sponsorship with Florida Citrus Commission ended, like everything was taken out that was related to Orangebird. And there used to be an Orangebird walk around character, believe it or not.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I thought that was super interesting. But it really wasn't until semi recently, I want to say like the late 2000s, early 2010s, that he kind of got brought back into popularity, and they actually like brought the character back into the parks. So I think that's an interesting example of how I guess something went away and came back.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. But are there any other ones that you guys can think of in Magic Kingdom? Because like I really don't think, like off the top of my head, I think this is the least obvious.
Mm-hmm.
The only other thing I can think of is maybe not even a sponsorship per se, but how there are all these Odwalla slushy type of drinks at the different restaurants. That's it's very prominently Odwalla, which I don't know if you guys know Odwalla is like the juice company or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that was like mildly interesting that, it's like a Odwalla slushy.
Which is interesting because, obviously all the drinks on property are Coke products. So for them to be able to get, theirs also in there is a pretty big deal. Because I know a lot of times, like when Coke sponsors something like that, they want to be the only ones. Like, for example, I went to school in Atlanta. Actually, both me and my wife did at separate schools. And because of the proximity to Coke's headquarters, they wanted to be sponsorship. So like on campus, any of our stores, you couldn't get any other products other than Coke products.
Huh.
I did just look it up just for clarity, and Odwalla is owned by Minute Maid, which is a division of Coke.
Well,
so
that explains it.
I guess
There
that's
you go.
why. But I think that whole Coke versus Pepsi thing is a really interesting dynamic because of all, not just Disney World, but life in general, different, like you were saying, schools or restaurants or whatever, like zoos and stuff. They get these deals and it's like, well, you're getting Coke or you're getting nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the other funny thing about that is Disney has a lot of like food and beverage sponsorships too. Like, I know for a while, I don't know if they still do, but Smucker's sponsored them because they had the Uncrustable peanut butter and jelly sandwiches everywhere.
Mm.
And then you also have like the Kellogg cereals and stuff like that in a lot of the breakfast places. Like that's another sponsorship that pays for a lot of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, do we want to move on to the last category on here?
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure. The last one that we have is Animal Kingdom, which really only has one that I can think of, which was the one that's on the list. So Dinoland USA and Dinosaur were sponsored by McDonald's at one point, which I feel like that's one of those facts that a lot of people probably know at this point, right?
Yeah.
Or it's not just me being like over assumptive.
I don't know. I feel like you hear about it pretty regularly. This is another one that I don't think makes sense at all.
Do you guys remember when hang on one second. Sorry, someone yelled for me from the other room. Anyway, do you guys remember when they would serve McDonald's French fries in Dido Land? Because I remember that there was that stand that was like right outside of Chester and Hester's that used to like have McDonald's food.
And also at I believe they used to sell them at the Golden Oak Outpost in Magic Kingdom too.
Huh. I don't remember that, but I definitely remember the one in Dino Land. That was always a weird thing to me because that's kind of like that breaking the immersion sponsorship where it's like, you know, I don't want to think about that outside, but I guess it's nice for the people that are picky eaters, I guess.
Well, it kind of fits in with the theming, you know, if this like kitschy roadside carnival got set up, you know, the next thing coming in is a McDonald's.
That's a good point.
That's very fair.
Man, that's like this one I totally thought didn't work at all, but it actually works really well.
Look at that. Brian proved us wrong. But the big thing that I guess a lot of people would know, or at least gets brought up when this sponsorship gets brought up, is the pipes in the Cute Dinosaur, which
that's just a fun, like, cute fact. I think
it's so clever. I think that was a good way to hide their sponsorship. I mean, it's just the chemical formula for ketchup, mustard, and mayo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But that's one of those things that like it hardly makes sense in like that's not the first thing I think of when I think of those things. Yeah. But at the same time, when I think of McDonald's, it kind of ties right in. So I get that one.
But you know that wasn't McDonald's. That was an Imagineer's idea.
Probably.
They're so good at hiding stuff. They're like, how can we minimize McDonald's like appearance in this area while them still being happy with the outcome?
So is there any other sponsorship things that you guys want to talk about before we end our talk on sponsorships in Disney?
I just wanted to bring up one interesting fact, which I think is probably something that a lot of people know already, but Frito-Lay company, you know, the chips and salty snacks and whatever. I don't know if it's necessarily a sponsorship, but Disney definitely has a deal with Frito-Lay because their snacks are all over the parks and resorts. Apparently, I just looked it up. Frito-Lay does sponsor Typhoon Lagoon. So that's interesting. And the baseball stadium at Wide World of Sports is called Cracker Jack Field. But the reason I brought this up is that I think it's interesting how this kind of all is like cyclical and got turned around, because if you guys may know this already, but for anybody listening that doesn't, Doritos were actually invented at Disneyland. So
I did not know that.
Yeah, so the story goes that they had like an excess of tortilla chips at this like little Mexican like food stand or restaurant that served Mexican food, and they were like, we can't sell all like this many tortilla chips. We need to find a way to sell them fast. So they like threw a bunch of spices on them and sold them, and that's how Doritos were made. So I think it's really interesting that Doritos were born at Disney and now they're everywhere.
That's crazy. Wow, I don't think I have anything to top that.
Fun historical fact of the day.
So to tie up sponsorships real quick before we end this, they're both good, they're both bad. You know, you can never really tell until the contract's about to be up. So we can always thank the companies that have sponsored some rides in the past, and we can always hope that they're going to stick around for the future. But is there anything else you guys want to talk about? Any emails or anything that we wanted to read this week? Because we have a little bit of time. We did. Which one? Oh, that really long one.
From Victoria?
Yeah. Okay. Let me read this real quick because I glanced over it after I saw that someone responded to it. Okay. So before we tie this week up, let's go over some of the nice words from our listeners this week. Some things that you guys had said to us, or comments from Facebook, Twitter, emails, whatever. First thing that we wanted to read over was an email from our listener, Victoria. Thanks for sending it in. Thank you for all of the kind words and everything that you said. But let's kind of go over some of the little things that she talked about here in respect to some stuff that she wanted us to talk about. Did you guys want to, I'm going to cut this part. Did you guys want to talk about the weather thing at Disney, or do we want to make that its whole another topic?
I think that could definitely be an episode.
Okay.
Or at least part of an episode.
Let's also save the Best World Showcase one. So I'm going to retract all of that. And let me read one more thing.
Do you maybe just... I mean, I responded to it, so I don't think it's a huge deal. You
I'll
could
just
acknowledge
say,
it and just say thanks for the kind words and suggestions. We're definitely going to use those in the future, kind of thing.
Right, yeah, we'll go over that. And then I just wanted to read this one comment on here from Maria, the response, because I feel like there was something else I wanted to read from one of these, but I can't remember what it was. Okay, yeah, I'll read both of those. So before we end this week, we wanted to kind of go over some listener correspondence, some stuff that you guys had sent in to us, just to say thank you to the people that have shared some kind words. The first person we wanted to give a shout out to was one of our listeners, Victoria. She sent us a couple show ideas. We're definitely going to go over them in the future because they deserve more time than the last 5 minutes of an episode. But thank you very much for sending in that email, Victoria. We really appreciate that. And I also wanted to give a quick shout out to two of our listeners who are always responding to our new episodes every week and are very much about telling us what they think of those episodes. And I really love when people do that because we get the chance to talk to some of you guys. But Juliet and Maria, thank you guys so much for sending in some thoughts on last week's episode and letting us know what you thought. Please don't stop telling us what you think of every episode that we put out, because that's what's important to us. Was there anything else you guys wanted to talk about with them?
I think I'm good.
Cool. I think I'm good too. So I'll record the outro later and anything else that I need to say.